Be seated. A couple of months ago, Pastor Mark sent Jim Igarda and I a text. He wanted us to, well, there's a correction in your bulletin here. This is not a sermon. This is a message. I don't do sermons. I do messages. Just want to clarify that. He wanted us to deliver a message to our respective first service and second service. And he was going to be in St. Louis at the Special United Methodist Conference. Now, he's decided since then that he needed to work on his doctorate. But I agreed, and so did Jim. But I agreed too soon. You know, we've all been told you need to read the entire document before you sign on the dotted line. Well, I did not read the entire document. So I went back and read it. Now he comes along, the pastor comes along and says, I want you to use John 17 as the topic of your message. Now I've done messages before, but it was always what I wanted to do, not somebody else. Not some Cajun preacher from Louisiana, but I was hooked. So I went and got my Bible. I sat down. New Testament, Apostle John, chapter 17, and I read it. And I sat for a few minutes. And then I read from the New Testament, Apostle John, chapter 17, again. And I kept waiting for that light to go on. And then I went to the New Testament, the Apostle John, chapter 17, and reread it again. And I didn't even get a flicker. So I decided to just leave it alone, let it soak. It didn't just jump off. I was waiting for the nudge. Now, the setting of chapter 17 in the book of John was after Christ and his disciples had eaten the Passover and the Lord's Supper together in the upper room, and he had given them encouragement. He closed the seriousness of the upcoming events with a prayer that God would preserve the good impressions of Christ's decree upon the disciples. Chapter 17 is a prayer. It is the Lord's Christ's prayer. It's been called Jesus' prayer. It's not the Lord's Prayer that he taught us to pray, because he didn't have to pray that prayer, because he didn't have to ask for the forgiveness of sins. Chapter 17 is Christ's prayer. It was proper and uniquely his prayer. It suited him only as a mediator and is a sample of his intervention on our behalf. And yet the prayer is of use to us for both instruction and of prayer. It was a family prayer, because the disciples were Christ's family. Now, the points of chapter 17, in verses 1 through 5, Jesus glorifies God, his Father, and asks to be asked to join God in that glory. He also states that his work is done here on earth. There's nothing else he can do. He is finished. In verses 6 through 10, he prays for those that are his. The disciples. He begins to introduce petitions to God on their behalf. In verse 11 through 16, he prays that the disciples will be held close. In verses 17 through 19, that the disciples might be sanctified. In verse 11 and 20 and 23, that the disciples will be united. And in verse 24 through 26, that the disciples might be glorified. He is petitioning the Father that the Father and Jesus are one. He is petitioning the Father that he and the disciples are one. Therefore, the Father and the disciples are one. That is his petition. That is his thoughts. Then he prayed for all the Christians, then, now, and in the future, to be unified. To be unified. So that all would be saved through the glory of God and Jesus. Pam, you need to move. I know, look at that. Poor thing. Well, it was kind of bright, reflection. Yeah. So I continued to let it soak. I knew what the setting was. I knew what it was about, but it just hadn't clicked yet. And I prayed for guidance. And what was the common thread, I kept asking myself. For me, it finally came that it was the desire of Christ to be one. To be one. God, Jesus, disciples, Christians, then and in the future, to be one. I thought about one. One. When was ever I a part of one? Well, I had to translate it. Remember, this is my interpretation of John 17. I had to translate it to Jesus wanted us to be a team. He wanted us to be united. I'm always looking up synonyms. And I started looking up synonyms for team. A squad, an assembly, a congregation, a force, a power, and an influence. He wanted us to belong. So I looked up belong. And it said to be in the right place. To be in the right place. In mind and in spirit. Now, I've been a member of teams, through the year. First there was family. Then it was church. Then it was grade school. Then it was Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship. And then high school, and of course, a couple of segments there, the basketball team and the football team. And then to college for a brief time. I didn't do too well the first track year. But then came the Army. Now I'm back in college, and I did a lot better. Then I have my own family attention to my parents' family. Zebco, I worked there for 36 years. I had to be part of a team there. And the walk to Emmaus was a big part that I've been a part of. The walk to Emmaus. What was the advantage for me when I was on a team? Was there an advantage to that? Well, it hit me. I accomplished more as part of a team than I did by myself. I flourished more often. I don't belong to many of those teams and groups now. However, the ones that remain are family and church. Why family and church? In my thinking again, because I am more outwardly focused in family, I am more outwardly focused in church. I really feel good when I help others in the family and the church. Again, I feel that I've flourished. I have grown. Not in body. Not in mind, as Linda, but in spirit. I feel that I've grown in spirit. When I'm with others from this church and I'm asked to pray, I always thank the Lord for them, for they are my family. Almost all of my family goes to this church. I have many brothers and sisters. Now, how can so many of us who are so different become a team, become one where Jesus wanted us to go? We need love. We need love. James Graham stated that love is blind and that marriage is the institution for the blind. A little differently. In 1 Corinthians 13:13, the Apostle Paul says, 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Faith is the belief that there is something better to seek. Better than what is here on this earth. Hope is the expectation or the certainty that there is something better to seek. Hope is the fuel that keeps faith alive in our lives in our quest to find love. The purpose of love is evident in 1 John 4:7-8. And it's the clearest picture of God that we've had. You've heard that before. Jesus said, "Dear friends, let us love one another. For love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love, or whoever does not know God, does not love, because God is love." Jesus goes on to say in verse 19 that we love because God first loved us. So the purpose of love is twofold in my mind. Love is the revelation of identity. It tells us who God is and who we are in God, the team. Second, love is the very power that allows us to do the work of Jesus and even greater works of Jesus, as he described in John 14, 12. He said, whoever believes in me will also do the works I have done, and even greater works, because I am going to be with the Father. Love has the power to help us believe again and restore hope in others. It is the engine that drives our spiritual lives. Man, I was fooling around and I looked up love in the dictionary. And I found a synonym that hit a chord with me: to bond. To bond. Bond. Tightly put together to capture the identity of one. We're pointed in the right direction from John 17 to love one another. You cannot love someone if you put your beliefs on him or her. You have to accept them as they are. All of us are loved despite ourselves. Our views and opinions are not held against us. So why would we hold others' beliefs against them? We must love to be a real team member. I once wanted to start a very special club, and all you had to do was sit in a corner, in a chair, facing the corner, and for 1 minute just not think about a polar bear. And I invited people to do that over the years. Not many took me up on it, but some tried. They got in a corner, faced the corner, sat down, and tried not to think about a polar bear for 1 minute. Well, years went by, but finally one person made it. One person was able to sit in that corner, in that chair, facing the walls, and not think about a polar bear for 1 minute. Harold W. But then the team club began to fall apart, because then Harold began to question my ability to sit in that corner facing the walls for 1 minute, let alone not think about a polar bear. So it just didn't work. It fell apart. Now, Wilson got close, but he didn't make it. But it fell apart. Trying to put my thoughts on them, trying to infuse me, my thinking in them. Just how dumb does that sound? To join that club. Just how dumb does that sound? It's about as dumb as expecting others to think like we do. It's about as dumb as expecting others to think exactly like us. But that's what we do so often. And it's us that drives the wedge between us and others. It's what keeps us apart. So to conclude my message, and again, my interpretation of the New Testament, John chapter 17. Love is not to say, but to understand. Love is not to show, but to feel inside. Love is not to find faults, but to make the best. Love is not to demand, but to sacrifice. Love is not to hurt, but to take care of. Love is not blind, but it doesn't need to see. 14 years ago, in February, I went to the walk to Emmaus. And one of the things I kept and have kept in my wallet for 14 years is a card we get from Emmaus as a reminder. So every time I go into my wallet, I see that. It talks about my spiritual life, what I should study, the actions I should take. But on the front of it, very simple. It's put, Christ is counting on you. We continually count on Christ to get us out of our fixes, out of our problems, out of our woes, out of the things that we cause. But we need Christ to help us stay out of those. He's counting on us to take care of ourselves, to take care of our woes, our troubles, by being a better individual. Christ is counting on you. Amen.